Welcome everyone to another edition of the Culture Show. I'm here with my sister Chey, as always, and we are here with a special guest in the building. We have brother Kaba Kamene. What's going on, Kamene? How you doing?
My brother, I am doing excellent. So happy to be here, to be able to speak to you and Sister Chey and your audience. I've been looking forward to this conversation, brother. And
yes, brother. You know, a lot of people, they know about you through Hidden Colors, but I want to dig deeper. Like, I want to go back to when you first got into African history. When did you get into enlightenment, and who inspired you?
Wow. It's interesting you asked that question, brother, because the question that you asked me is so very important, but there's one thing I'd like to tell you before that. And that is, I grew up in a project in New York, mid-Manhattan. And I grew up in a community where there were many cultures from the African diaspora. And I particularly had friends from Puerto Rico. And I had a friend whose family practiced Santeria. And I would go to his house and we would hang out with each other. And there were times that they would have celebrations where they would call upon the Orishas. And I was Roman Catholic, grew up Roman Catholic. Straight through high school, Roman Catholic school. Choir boy, altar boy. I dare say I even want to be a priest. I would see images of Africans that I never saw in my life. And the people that were celebrating, many of them were my melanation, but there were some that were not. And so in this celebration and in this phenomenal experience, the love that was in the room, the people that shared, and dancing, you know, and the food and just all the things that went into the celebration became very important to me. Now, the reason why I say that is because I was never introduced, I should say this, my first introduction to Africa was not through history, it was through spirituality. And that becomes very important in terms of the formation of the human mind, particularly when it's a child's mind.
Absolutely.
I'm talking about 7 years old, 8 years old, 9 years old, 10 years old.
So this was happening when you was that young?
Yes, man. Yeah, because I was hanging out with my friend.
Okay.
You know, he'd come over to my house. I'd go over to his house, you know. And there were times that I would be in his house where they would be celebrating Santeria, where they would go through the rituals of Santeria. I had neighbors upstairs that were from Haiti, you know, and again, when you go back into a child's mind, there are certain things that I didn't understand. There were certain things that my mind as an 8-year-old, 9-year-old was pre-reasoning skills. All I see children sense your feelings. They pick up. They're very empathetic. And unfortunately, humans lose their empathy as they mature. And see, there's a difference between sympathy and empathy.
Right.
Sympathy is when you feel, let me just put it like this. You feel for somebody, but you have never experienced it.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. Empathy is when you feel for someone and you have felt it before. For instance, I always give the example, if you were to go to your friend's mother's funeral with your mother, the best you could have is sympathy. Because you've never experienced the loss of your mother.
But if you did,
that's
empathy. Yeah.
Because you now feel what that person feels.
And I'm glad you broke that down, because a lot of people get those words mixed up.
Oh yeah. Because and that becomes very important, because I know the difference between having sympathy for somebody and having empathy for somebody. But that also attached me to children, because part of my background is 31 years as a teacher and an administrator in the New York City Board of Education.
Wow.
And so, and I've taught every grade, I've taught every subject, I've taught college for 14 years. So I've been able to track children throughout their entire experience up until 21, 22. And I even had adult students.
Wow.
So that one thing that I've seen about children, and I've watched them, because I stayed in the same community in South Central Bronx all of my career. I never moved out. And I stayed in the community in order to track my work. I didn't want to lose the children. You know, if I teach, you know, a couple years in Brooklyn, and then I start teaching in the Bronx, and then I start teaching in Manhattan, I'm teaching children, wonderful experience, but I don't watch them grow.
Right.
You know, I actually taught college, and one of my students in college was one of my students in elementary school.
Wow.
That's how deep it got. But the idea is that when you're young, you have to depend on your senses.
Exactly.
And an infant depends on his or her motor sensors. You know, an infant smells mother. An infant can sense mothers in the room, maybe through smell, maybe through sound, maybe even the way mama walked with her slippers on.
That's
Survival,
how my daughter do.
Okay, well then you know what I'm saying.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
And as you grow, your motor skills grow and your empathy grows. But in order to survive as you get older in a dog-eat-dog world, a lot of times you got to put your empathy to the side and you got to just work through reason. The perfect African mind is a reasoning, empathetic mind. Never forget what it feels like. And children have a very unique way of feeling it, but not experiencing it because they're too young.
Right.
But they can sense in you what you're feeling.
Right.
And that's how they can respond to it. So to answer your question, by the time I became 12 and a half, I first met Professor John Henry Clark.
Heavy scholar for our listeners out there. And you know, one of the things that Dr. Clark said that I still coin to this day, because I'm always debating, I'm not even debating anymore, but I'm always having conversations with individuals about ancient Egypt. And Dr. Clark taught me one thing, is one of the most famous saying, I don't debate with those who are not my equals. I teach.
Yes.
That's Dr. Clark for you.
Let me give you something else that he used to say. He used to say, you can only have a debate when you have two sides. You don't have a side. Think about what that means psychologically.
Right.
Because I'm done arguing the Africanity of Kemet or Egypt. I'm done. I'm not going to discuss that anymore. If there's other people that will discuss it, that's fine. Go to them, but don't go to me.
Right.
I don't discuss that anymore. That's not a debate anymore.
Right.
And if you allow somebody to entertain their thought, as illusionary as it is, you still are allowing them to bring it into existence.
Exactly.
You ain't bringing that nonsense into my existence. You bring that to somebody else.
Right.
Homie, don't play that.
Oh, that's right.
And we have to get to a point where we're willing to cut people off. There are certain things I don't discuss anymore. I'll direct people as to who might discuss it with them, but I'm not. I've already come to a scientific conclusion about the Africanness of Kemet. But what's even more important than that is the fact that you can't understand Kemet or Egypt if you don't understand Kush.
Which predates Egypt.
It is Egypt. Egypt doesn't exist. Think about if, like when African Americans in the 20s and 30s and the 40s moved out of the South, you know, that great migration north, the great northern migration to the north. Right. My father came up from Alabama, and I have family from Alabama that came up to New York. And when they came up to New York and their family's still in Alabama, the people who are in New York are still the same Alabamians. And that's who the Kemites are. The Kemites are the same Africans that were in Kush. The way in which Indo-European, and when I use it, I mean European and Asian. I use Indo-European to bring them in a group and not separate the European from the Asian. They are the northern climate impacted by the Ice Age. They're very early people that came in, particularly the ones that came and called it Ethiopia. That's one group of people. Same people called it Ethiopia were the ones that called it Aegyptos. Okay. Out of Aegyptos, it further was created the word Egypt. A, E, Gu, Gi, and patos became pt. So Egypt is a derivative of the word Aegyptos.
Mm-hmm.
But the Greeks and the other Indo-Europeans got that word from the African name of the capital that today is called Memphis, but they called it Hiku Ptah.
Mm-hmm.
Hiku Ptah is the hill that rose up out of the waters to establish the theocratic capital of Kemet. Ptah means hill. And in order to create Memphis, what the African engineers did is that they rediverted the Hapi River. They put an elbow in it and they dumped up land, to create a land base. So they used the imagery of that dumping up of land, moving the waters as a hill that came up out of the waters of Hapi, or the Nile River.
Mm-hmm.
So they called it Hika, which means the spirit of the hill that rose up out of the waters. So Hika Ptah was the word that the Indo-Europeans came upon, where they then called it Aegyptos.
Mm.
Further people coming in took Aegyptos and made it
Egypt.
Egypt, but originally it was Hikaptah.
Right.
So when you use the word Egypt, you're still using an African word. It's like when Black folks speak Ebonics.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
We're speaking English, but we're speaking a different flavor of it through our cultural understandings.
That's deep. That's deep.
Family, this is us. One of the greatest stories ever told has yet to be told. We are the greatest story that has ever and will ever be told.
Definitely.
And we have that epigenetic tag in us. And that's what I'm trying to tap into our people. We all deep inside of us have that spirit of the pyramid builders.
Mm-hmm.
Just like we have the plantation dwellers and those that grew up on a project. Do this because, the other thing, family, is that children always said to me, well, Brother Booker T, that was my name before I corrected it.
Mm-hmm.
Why do I need to know this? Why is this culture important? Who cares what people did before me?
Right. That's usually one of the questions I get too. Like when we discuss African history, it's always, why is it so important? Why is Black history or African history so important? And that's the same question people always ask.
Social studies covers 5 basic areas: geography, history, politics, economics, and social. Those 5 areas answer very important questions about life. And if you can answer these 5 questions, then you can pretty much grasp an analysis. Geography answers the question where.
Mm-hmm.
History answers the question when. Politics answers the question how. Economics answers the question what. And social answers the question who. Who, what, where, when, how.
Mm-hmm.
And once you answer those questions, then much of it just takes a critical analysis to come to a conclusion. But you got to know where something is, when something is, how something is, what something is, and who something is. And once you answer those questions, then you move into other areas and you're able to accomplish certain goals that you set out for yourself.
Powerful, brother. Powerful.
So I know that you are moving forward from Hidden Colors, right? You've already discussed this. We know the topics. We know the truth, right? We know the facts. But a lot of our viewers have not been able or have never heard of Hidden Colors. Can you just give them an overview of how this applies and why it's so important and a part of learning about the past?
Dr. Wade Noble's brilliant scholar, Sister Chey, says that culture is to a human as water is to a fish. You breathe in it, you live in it, you eat in it. Everything you do in your life, you do in it and through it. And when you think about being able to answer those 5 questions, you in the water doing all this, but you have no idea the importance of water in your life as a fish.
Right.
Imagine that. You are existing in an existence, but do not know that that existence is what makes you exist.
Right.
Black folk walking the earth, deeply steeped in African culture, swearing they can't stand Africa. That's ridiculous.
And you know, we got a lot of brothers, and I spoke to Dr. Rashidi about this before he passed.
Okay.
And he was quite irritated with this new rhetoric
Yes.
of we're not Africans, we're something else.
Yes.
And it's continued to cause this diaspora divide that myself and Chey have spoken on right here on this show several times. What is your standpoint on Africans claiming to be something other than Africans for whatever one reason or another?
It's like a fish saying, I live, but I'm not in water.
Mm-hmm.
And they're telling you that in water. So if you can imagine, because I like to do metaphors, because our people speak in metaphors. Rap music is based in metaphor.
Right.
Our music is based. Our lives are based. You know, yo, that's bad. Okay, that's a metaphor.
Mm-hmm.
Something so good it became bad. There was no way we could express how good it was, so we had to do the opposite and say, yo, that's dope. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
When I was growing up, dope was dope.
Mm-hmm.
I found out about dopamine and melanin, that kind of took it off.
Right.
But the idea is that, like I say to my brothers and sisters that come to me with that concept, the same way they come to me and they tell me that there was a parallel culture growing in America at the same time life was coming from Africa. Okay. No. And like I told you earlier, that there are some times that I just don't discuss anything anymore. It comes a point to my brothers and sisters that I say, look, I love you unconditionally. And I hear what you're saying, but ain't no way you and I will ever be in accord with what you're saying. So let me not waste your time and don't waste mine by even trying to talk to each other right now about that. Right. So tell me how you like the weather. No, because I don't have time.
Right.
Family, we don't have time now. Our children need this, whatever it is that we are to do, just like our ancestors on the plantation or those who were colonized on the continent. There were groups of Africans that came to realize we don't have time anymore for nonsense.
That's what Kobe, I saw a quote the other day, and Kobe Bryant, he said that. He said that the biggest mistake that human beings make is thinking that we have time.
Right.
Found that to be real deep.
You know, and to take that to where I see it, I tell people the most precious thing you have is time. Mm-hmm. It is the most precious thing you have. You can lose all your money and you can make more. You can lose your house, can burn down, you can build another. But there'll never be another March 18th, 2023.
Right.
And how you spent that time, you can't get back. Time is the most precious thing that we have. In fact, it's the only thing that humans work on in order to become conscious. Time. And that becomes very important to understand. Some people don't realize the value of time, so they'll stand there and argue with you. I don't have a millisecond to argue with you.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't have time. I have to move on. Okay, I recognize you. I love you unconditionally. You my brother, you my sister, much regard. I don't have time for you right now. Because there are other folk out here that are ready to receive this information. I'm looking for them. Because if I have to convince you of how great you are, there's nothing I can say that will convince you. If I don't have to convince you, then let's just roll back our sleeves and get it on. Mm-hmm. Let's not waste time. And so I'm in full accord with that concept of time. And when we look at that quote and we look at our brother Kobe, you can see how dramatically important that concept is.
Absolutely.
Not just for him, but for his daughter and for his family that will spend time without them. Okay, we ain't got time right now. So you want to go with these QAnon or these conspiracies or whatever? We have to build dynasties.
Yeah.
I have known academics that were absolutely brilliant. But when it came to emotion, they was cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. And I'm talking about people that went on to go to Harvard, Yale. Some of the craziest people I've ever met in my life have double degrees from Harvard and Columbia. And we have this image of education that makes you who you are. Dr. Clark didn't get out the 7th grade, brother. All of his awards that he got, he was what's called an autodidact. He taught himself that. He wrote so profusely, his writings went up. That's how he was able to advance to retire at the chairperson emeritus of Hunter College's Black and Puerto Rican Studies Department. The brother didn't get out the 7th grade.
Wow.
He is the one that I give all credit for all my intellectual inquisitiveness about Africa, historically.
I hope everybody listening get your pen, because Dr. Clark, who really was a pioneer in Pan-Africanism, really, it's amazing to know he didn't even get out of 7th grade. Self-taught.
That's it. Tapped
into his inner being to understand who he was. How important your history is to you.
When you think about circumnavigation, right, we are taught in the school system about Christopher Columbus. I personally am always getting in trouble with my daughter's teachers about Christopher Columbus every year, right? Because I don't teach my daughter that this is a person that we should be honoring.
Yes.
You know, and I teach her that to honor him and to give him, you know, all this praise for discovering America, which you didn't, is dishonoring your ancestors.
Yes.
So when you think about circumnavigation and Christopher Columbus and the impact that it's had on our kids, right? Because that's our focus, to enlighten them and to wake them up. What do you think we can do better to make this process easier for all children?
Okay. Sister Chey, let me step back for a minute and tell you that you never get in trouble with your daughter's school because you teach the truth. The honest truth is, the truth, when it's told, causes them trouble.
Right.
They don't want in trouble. And that's the way all information is. If we're dropping information, people say, I'm a troublemaker. No, I'm not a troublemaker. I'm a truth teller. And it just so happens that the truth causes you trouble. Right. But I'm not a troublemaker. You made your own truth by believing a lie. Right. And when someone tells a perfect lie, the truth is unbelievable. And in terms of navigating the world, there were Africans here that did not come via the Bering Strait. The first Africans that came to this continent came via Africa. And there's a very good chance that they probably came into South America, because there's a current, a Benguela current, that leaves the western coast of Southern Africa. It's called the Benguela. There are 3 currents that leave off the coast of Africa throughout the entire breadth of the African continent. The southernmost one is called the Benguela current. And the Benguela current will take a ship and bring it right into the Amazon River. Okay, and then the wind systems that will go with it. And chances are the first peoples that came to this part of the world were in South America and then traveled. And then you had the second migration known as the Clovis Folsom. And they would come at a later date, but they were the taller stature Africans. The first Africans came here were the Twa people, the very short statured people, derogatorily called pygmies. And so then the third was the Algonquin, still an African people, but they would be settling in southern Canada, northern United States, up there in all those states on that boundary.
Mhm.
coming from New York, going straight across. Africans learned how to get on the waters. They learned how to build a boat. The first Vikings were black. There are carvings of them. The book, The First Americans Were Africans by Dr. David Imhotep, shows you the carvings of short-statured black people.
Yes.
They're black people look like Kevin Hart. I mean, I don't mean to yell out my brother Kevin, but I'm just saying that his height,
Right.
he would be considered a giant.
So
Amongst-
when you say that, Kaba, a lot of the rhetoric goes back to Ivan Van Sertima and his
Yes.
thoughts of Abu Bakr of Mali. And was this the later after?
Yes.
Yeah. Far after. Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
In fact, I went to Mexico and studied with Dr. Van Sertima in the summer of 1984.
Mm.
A year after I had gone to Egypt for the first time in 83 with Dr. Ben. I saw what he was talking about. They came before Columbus. I saw where he got this from. And there are waves of Africans coming here. See, this is where a lot of the misunderstandings come from. Because I hear brothers and sisters talk about Africans being here in America originally. And they're correct. But they came from Africa.
Exactly.
But African people were the first people in America. And I have studied scholars that have dated bones in San Diego, California, of a black woman, and the bones are dated 90,000 years ago.
Talk about it.
Khalifa was
That's
a
where California
black
comes from.
That's where the word California comes from. And the Khalifa people. In Hawaii, all black people. King Kamehameha was the last king. This brother got a short afro.
Mhm.
So I could see how the first humans in America were Africans. But they date back so far, people that don't do the proper research might think that they originated there.
Mm-hmm.
When you don't see the capacity of black people going on the waters, when everything you see is they're asking other people for money. They got this now thing on where there's a ship that travels on the water doing operations for black people, in Africa that are deformed or distorted. Their bodies are troubled. And so we're watching them denigrate Africa, but ain't nothing more denigrated than what's happening in Ukraine today.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Because what I tell people all the time is, you talk about empathy, ain't nobody in the world more empathetic to Ukrainians than black folk.
Exactly.
We know what it's like for an alien people to come and bomb your house and bomb your children and bomb your hospitals and make you leave your land. Nobody understands it better than black people.
And then we happen to be take the brunt of the assault in the end.
Exactly.
As we see what's happening with a lot of our brothers and sisters in the Ukraine right now.
Oh,
unable to flee.
Absolutely. Absolutely. By the same people that everybody's honoring. And again, I don't speak in absolutes. I know there's good and bad in all people. Okay, so I'm not going to blanketly say anything about anybody that everybody's like that.
Mm-hmm.
But I remember the story that the Honorable Elijah Muhammad used to tell, where he said that there are 1,000 wolves outside your door, and there's 900 of them going to tear you apart, eat you up the moment you step outside. And there is 100 that would put their life on the line to protect you. This is when we start talking about good white people.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. 100 of them would put their life on the line, and they would. And you know that they would. But here's the problem. You don't know where they are in that 1,000.
Mm-hmm.
Are you ready to go outside?
Nope.
I ain't. So the point that I'm making is I ain't got time to look for good white people. Besides, if you did your job right, those 100 would do battle with the 900 to make it safe for me to come outside.
Mm-hmm.
See, this thing that's going on here in America with the Republicans and the Democrats and, with the Hatfields and the McCoys and all the rest of this stuff, okay? They've been at war with each other from the very beginning.
Mhm.
The idea of democracy, demokratia, comes from the word people power. Demokratia. Republican comes from the concept of for the people, republica. Neither of them are for the people or give the people power.
Exactly.
Yet they claim to do all this.
Mhm.
And so here we are, we're watching all this going on. And we're all being tripped up because we are not properly based. So when children say to me, why do you need to know this? Is because outside of every temple in Kush Kemet, there was a sign that said, know thyself. And it is only in knowing yourself that leads to the second step, which is to manage yourself, or what we call self-discipline. And when you can know yourself and have self-discipline, then you can know other people, which is social knowledge. And then when you know other people, then you can manage other people, and that's called leadership.
Mhm.
But the first step in this odyssey is to know yourself.
Absolutely.
And they say, well, why do you got to go back so far? Well, then, okay, I do this recently. I didn't have it back then, but I have a Nerf slingshot.
Mhm.
I picked it up when I was hanging out with my grandson one day.
Mhm.
And I said, wow, I can tell that story now. And a slingshot, you put a projectile in the sling and you pull it back.
Mhm.
And the further you pull it back, the further in front you're going to project it.
Yep.
The further back I ain't pulling this back just to stay back here. I'm pulling it back specifically to project it in front of me.
That's deep.
Knowledge of self, I always say, allow me to put your mind in this sling and pull it back as far as I can take it. In fact, I can take your mind to a time before the beginning began, before existence existed. And if I can take you back this far, I can project you into the future. So everything that I do is not to take you back there. I'm only taking you back there in order to project you forward.
Mm.
A
I love
prophet
that.
is
I
not
love
a
that.
psychic. A prophet is not a psychic. A prophet is a good historian. Because when you know what happened in the past, you can interpret what's happening in the present, and you can predict what's going to happen in the future.
True.
And when it happened, everybody looking at you say, well, how did you know that? You must be palm reading or something. It had nothing to do with that. I knew what happened in the past. Just like I know what's going to happen now, because I know what happened in the past.
And that brings me to Chey, what you opened up with, the quote from Marcus Garvey that you opened up with.
I like it when you said that.
It's a person without his culture or history is like a tree with no roots.
Mhm.
Marcus Garvey told us that. That's very same thing, that the importance of knowing your history, of going back, like that slingshot that Brother
Yeah.
Kaba just mentioned.